welcome to the latest in our series of webinars from the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce this morning. My name is Sandy Kirkpatrick. I'm one of the business account managers here at the Chamber, and I'm pleased to welcome Heather Stanbury and Lucy Martin from SYLO HR. SYLO HR stands for Sort Your Life Out. I'm going to beat you to that one because I think that's a fantastic little acronym there, so well done whoever thought that one. And they're based up in Thame in Oxfordshire, an HR consultancy who provide essential HR advice but also go well beyond that as well, and provide people support, coaching and recruitment, as well as a host of other things which I'm sure Lucy and Heather will introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about as well. So this morning's topic is hybrid working. A particularly hot topic at the minute, and one that's on the tongues of most businesses and employees throughout the country. And I, for one, am particularly keen to hear what Lucy and Heather have got to say this morning. At the Chamber, we are currently working full-time from home at the minute, but I think we will move to a flexible or a hybrid approach, and as we were discussing prior to this webinar, the devil's in the detail, so very much looking forward to hear the presentation this morning. A couple of things from me. There'll be a Q&A. Please feel free, the chat box will be open, so please feel free to stick your questions and answers in there, and we will do a quick Q&A at the end of the session. The session will be recorded and I'll be put live on the Thames Valley Chamber website and on our YouTube channel as well. So you can refer to that after the session again. And without further ado, I will hand over to Heather and Lucy. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Sandy. Thank you. Good morning. Just an excellent introduction. Thank you from Sandy. Yes, we're from SYLO Beyond HR. My name is Lucy Martin. I'm a business consultant within SYLO, and I look more at the business strategy within a business. So it's all fine and sorting out your HR policies, but it's also about how those HR policies and essential advice fits into your overall business. So I tend to take a much more holistic view and work with our business partners, our HR's business partners, like Heather, who will look much more into your HR resources and what you need. But as Sandy rightly said, we also cover learning and development, so training and people support in terms of wellbeing, employee wellbeing, and also health and safety, which is also part of a company's requirements. Without further ado, we're going to go on through. So the next, just to show you what we're going to cover in the session. We'll talk about hybrid working, but what actually is it? And actually we're going to put a definition together so that we all know what we think it is. And if you have any questions on that, please, as I say, put things up on the chat and we'll take them at the end. And what could it look like? There is no one definitive answer of what hybrid working looks like. It will look very different for every single organisation. So we'll look at some of the options which you can consider as part of for you. There are an awful lot of pros being talked about in terms of everybody working from home, and that's all fine, but there are cons to hybrid working, and we'll be looking both at the pros and the cons of hybrid working within your organisation, and then we'll go into a little more detail of actually considering what those might be and how they can impact on you, both positive and negative, and then just a quick roundup at the end in terms of how you make it happen, because it is a little bit more complicated than just opening up the doors, or rather shutting the doors to the office. And then we'll do Q&A at the end. So Heather, what is hybrid working?
So at its most basic level, it is that combination of remote working or semi-remote, or so you basically, you decide as an organisation if you want some employees to work part of their time from home and part of their time from the office, although true hybrid working might be working anywhere. So it may sound like flexible working in disguise, but there is a distinction. It does enable both the employers and employees to decide how and when, and crucially where you work best, and allowing for that sort of balance of life and work according to the business and sort of personal needs. There may be some red lines about what's feasible. You know, a lot of organisations need to embrace the principle and how it can work for them, because it is you know, something that a lot of employees are going to want sort of going forward with the current climate and with people having worked from home for so long. You know, since the pandemic began, there is a real appetite for people to have more flexibility in how they work. We also need to look at, you know also people's considerations about travelling to work, because with public transport still being, you know, potentially risky, that we have to think about, okay, well, some people might prefer to work from home part of the week, and then, you know, come in sort of a couple of days a week. So we're just going to have a look at sort of, you know, these options, and really the difference also between hybrid working and flexible working, and, you know, different aspects of flexible working and how they might sort of work together.
Okay, thank you. Just thought it'd be useful to have a look at what other organisations are doing, and these are all very big organisations. So you can see the BPUs have now said all their staff can work from home 2 days a week. For PwC, 40 to 60% of the time in client offices, which means the rest could be at home. Nationwide is saying 13,000 out of its 18,000 employees can decide where they want to work under a new flexible working scheme. Now that's quite interesting, because they are a front-facing, customer-driven organisation. So what happens to all of their, they're not stores, all their offices, their frontline banks and what have you? Interestingly, CIPD said 65% of recent employers did not offer home working pre-pandemic, but that's actually going to fall to 37%. So the vast majority of companies are expecting to offer some kind of home working going forward post-pandemic, and 57% of employees, if you like, are saying they want to continue working from home. And the government, I don't know if you saw it recently in the news, are saying they're actually looking at a default option about working from home. So it may be you're right to ask for working from home straight off, rather than having to wait 6 months, which is the current rule. But there's a lot of debate about what that actual will look like and whether it would go to legislation. But these are some of the things that some other organisations are doing. But interestingly, some of the big tech giants who had originally said everybody will work home forever are now backtracking on that and saying, actually, no, we do need people back in the office. So there's also here a look at what's temporary and what's permanent. And I don't think anyone should be putting permanent in anywhere soon, because we don't know what the next thing around the corner is. What we're going to look at now, Heather's going to have a quick chat, is look at some of those pros and cons of hybrid working. Heather,
yeah. So I'm going to cover. I'm covering pros and cons. So yeah, we wanted to be honest, when we have done this presentation once before, and we've updated it. And before we actually had a lot of what the pros were, but now it's really coming to light that there are some, you know, some more cons around it that we need to sort of explore as well. So we will look at, consider the business impacts and sort of return on investments. But just looking in terms of productivity and creativity. So productivity can be better at home, especially with the right support. But for some employees, it may be less effective. Some employees prefer to bounce ideas around and collaborate in person. We've all heard about Zoom fatigue, and some people are just really keen to just get back in the office, or just get around a table with their colleagues, and have some real discussions. And so I think there is an appetite for that. In terms of employee engagement, listening and responding to employees wanting to work flexibly is obviously going to be important to achieve that work-life balance, which is what a lot of people are wanting. But there's also lots of opportunity to engage. There's a lot of opportunity and engage with staff sometimes, and win that trust when you're not in the office having those water cooler conversations. And it's actually harder, and you've got to work harder and smarter, I think, to try and engage staff who are working from home. And so there is, there's more thought that needs to go into your communications and how you know, how you're going to get your engagement up with your current workforce, because there is evidence to suggest that there's a lot of employees who aren't engaged as probably they would have been if we hadn't had this pandemic. And in terms of attracting and retaining talent, everyone's got to really start thinking about, well, actually, if you're attracting, trying to attract new candidates for positions, you've really got to have an idea of what you're going to offer them, because that might be one of their questions. Well, is there a hybrid option to work with this company? And so therefore, I think when you do advertise, you need to probably have all your ducks lined up in terms of what you might want to offer people. And as Lucy said, some of the tech firms, they start saying, oh yes, you can work from home, whenever. But then some of there is some backtracking, because people are getting into the detail and thinking, well, actually, we've got to see what's achievable. And what we'll come on to later a little bit as well is actually just analysing each role and saying, well, which roles are suitable for hybrid, because obviously there's quite a lot of roles potentially who may not be suitable for hybrid, and what else can we offer them? So impact of sort of nurturing diversity and inclusion. So initially people thought, yeah, actually it's really good for diversity and inclusion, having people working from home, because they've got that flexibility, which is sometimes helpful when you've got kids, etc., or other sort of caring responsibilities. But now there's a view that, well, hang on, will lots of men just go back to the office, and then lots of women will end up home working, and then their visibility is not as great, and they might not be as considered for promotions and things. And so we've really got to think about the mix of staff coming back, and really just trying to think about diversity and inclusion, and how we can bring everyone along and think about what we can do to try and ensure that we don't lose anything through going down a hybrid working sort of model. So impact on employee wellbeing. So obviously work-life balance with more personal time for other activities is what most people are sort of looking for. Obviously less commuting, hopefully would shorten people's days. But for some people the opposite happens, and the fact they end up working longer hours, and if they don't manage their time, you just get this creep where they just they don't switch off, and they don't stop working. And sometimes you just get actual productivity dips at that point, because people actually become less productive when they're they're tired, or they might feel anxiety. There's obviously also an increase in depression and feelings of isolation. So all these things need to be considered, and actually maybe a hybrid versus a remote working environment, that could be good if they're coming into the office part of the time, because you've got that mix, haven't you? And you've got that blend, which could work better for people, so they get some of the work-life balance, and then but then they also get that visibility, and they get that opportunity to work more closely with their colleagues. And managing employee performance. I think this is really, it's really challenging for managers to manage staff remotely, and I think managers need more training in this. Some people will obviously be more effective working from home with less interruptions, but it's probably about managers really understanding their direct reports and what works for them, and trying to create solutions for each individual as to what things they find challenging. So at the moment with remote working, and then going forward with what organisations decide to do in terms of remote working. So that's what we see as the pros and cons at the moment. Could we have the next slide? Yeah, thanks. So I'm just going to give a little overview, and then we're going to go into each of these areas of hybrid working considerations. And we've put this together for the sort of 4 key areas that we see are sort of challenges. So looking at business planning and comms, so Lucy's going to look at that in a moment. So you're looking obviously at your business objectives and your strategy, and your cost implications of maybe going down to a hybrid working model. And also the fact that you need to communicate with staff and really understand what they're looking for, and then potentially working out what the business can accommodate. So Lucy's going to talk about that in a moment. I'm going to talk about policies, procedures, and sort of IT security, and really the different types of so you've got hybrid working, flexible working generally, and remote working, and how some of those might feed into each other. Then we'll look at training and performance management, which I think is quite important, particularly, obviously you've experienced it with people working remotely, but you know, how we're going to move that forward if you went down a hybrid model. And then I'll be looking at employee wellbeing and health and safety, which there is quite a lot of considerations within that with remote working. And also, obviously, people have been doing things on a temporary ad hoc basis, because the view is that people will be going back to the office after the when the pandemic, when the government restrictions allow us to. But actually, you know, we do need to be considering for the long term what we need to do from a health and safety perspective. So, Lucy, I'll hand over for you to talk about business planning and comms.
Thank you. I think this is the key thing to think about first when you look at hybrid working, because at the end of the day, this is a match, is a meeting of two ways between what the business really needs and what your employees need. And I think hybrid working is very much being pitched as this is best for employee and employee-led working, which is fine. But at the end of the day, you do have to hit the bottom line. You do have to, the business has to keep functioning effectively and efficiently. And if everybody's working from home and you've got a very creative industry, that may not work for your industry, for your particular company. So this is really about looking at what the business needs and what employee needs, and finding that point where you can make it work. And there may be some red lines that say, actually, we can't make it work that way, but we can make it work this way. So I think one of the first places you need to start is by looking at your business objectives and your strategy. So where is your business going? Where does it want to be in the next 6 months, year, and probably up to 3 years? It's a bit difficult to go a bit further than that. And start looking at what you want to achieve and how you're going to get there based on the people that you've got currently. And then there's the cost implications of this. So if you shut the offices, technically, you've saved all that rent, but actually then you have to equip however many people at home. And there is also the fact that a lot of people are planning to shut half their offices, and so people will be working from home. But actually those working from home have a right to have an office set up in their home. So you could actually be costing out for 2 offices instead of just 1. So there are implications around that in terms of costing. So get your business strategy sorted, get your business objectives sorted, but also then start listening to your employees. And one of the ways of doing that could be an employee survey. So go out and ask people. There's always an assumption that actually perhaps you think everyone wants to work from home, but they may not. They may want that flexible. They may want 2 days at home, 3 days in the office, or vice versa. So find out what your employees want, because it could be that there is an automatic halfway house between what they want and what you want and what's right for the business. If there isn't, then you need to start working that through. The one thing that I keep saying, and when I've done these before, is it's about being fair, consistent and transparent. And that comes down to your communication. So you have to be very open and honest with your employees about the decisions you are making, why you are making them, and what the benefits are to them and to the business. So the key thing to take out of this particular aspect is being fair, transparent and consistent. And for some people it may feel unfair, but at the end of the day, as long as you are communicating very clearly, then you have a much better idea, you're much more likely to bring people on board in terms of what is right for you in the business. We're going to look now though at what that impact that might be in terms of, if people are working from home, do you need to change their contracts?
Hi, so I'm going to talk you through this. I just first wanted to just make sure that we've got this sort of definition of hybrid working and flexible working and remote working. So obviously remote working is really when someone's working from home the whole time, which obviously with the restrictions a lot of people are at the moment. Flexible working can be a number of things. So it can be partly working from home, but it can also be things like compressed working hours, flexi time. So there are, there are a number of ways that you can give people some sort of flexible working opportunities. And just to give you an example, if we look at what PwC have offered their staff, so they're going to that, you know, 40 to 60% of the time in the office or at a client site, so they can work from home a couple of days a week. So they're doing the hybrid working. They're also saying, actually, you can flex the time you start and you finish. And then they're also saying, actually, in the summer months, you can finish early on a Friday if you work a compressed week. So that's where they work their normal working hours in 4.5 days. And so therefore that will allow them to have a Friday afternoon off. So they're actually looking at all of these things and actually coming up with a blended solution. And one thing to think about is, if you are looking at roles and deciding, actually, for these employees, we really can't, you know, hybrid working just doesn't work in their roles, then what you can do is think about, well, are there any flexible options we can offer them? Because you don't want to give them nothing. You want to say, well, actually, is there anything we can do? And you could consult with them on that, and you can think about what works for the business. But I think this fairness and trying to do what you can where you can will you know, hopefully engage employees. People might feel a bit disengaged if they feel that half the workforce are getting this hybrid working and it just doesn't work for their role, so they're not really getting a great deal out of it. So it is about trying to, you know, come up with a solution that's going to, you know, work for the business and also work for the, you know, the majority of the employees. You know, you're never going to please everyone all of the time. So it is, you know, the first step is to decide, well, which roles really are eligible for, you know, hybrid working, because that's your sort of base point. And how are you going to ask people to request hybrid working? So obviously some organisations have just made a decision and gone across the board and said, right, that's what we're doing. But maybe for a small organisation, you may be better to just go down the route of them putting a flexible working request in. So normally people need to have 6 months employment to put a flexible working request in. If you've got people who haven't got that, you can, as an option, you know, that isn't a statutory requirement, you can say, well, actually, you can put a flexible working request in, and then you could consider it like you would, you know, any other. It just doesn't work for larger organisations when you're talking about, you know, a lot of people. If you've got a small organisation, you could still go down that route and get them to put a flexible working request in, and then you just consider it, and they also have to write down how they think it will work, and then you would consider it and give them, you know, give them an outcome. But there are some statutory reasons that you can state if, for instance, it doesn't work, or, you know, you can have a conversation and come to some sort of compromise about what might work. And that's more of an individual approach as opposed to, you know, doing something that's more broadly across the, you know, across the whole company. It will very much, you know, vary depending on your industry and, you know, the sort of employee base that you've got. And I actually think people should just be trying to keep an eye on what's happening in their industry, because in terms of employee retention, you know, your employers are potentially going to go and work for maybe other people within your industry. So I keep an eye on what's happening in your industry, because you might find it, you know, it varies depending on the industry that you're in. So as I just gave that example with PwC, really think about how it's going to interact, the forms of flexible working with potentially hybrid. So just throw it all in the mix and have a think about what's, you know, what could work for your organisation, and, you know, put the, you know, some ideas out there with, also with management as well, and think about what they think could work, as well as just, you know, the individual employees who you'll obviously need to consult, which I'm sure you've probably done already. It's just about bringing it all together, and also having an update, because people's ideas may change over time. So obviously a lot of companies are home working at the moment, but in terms of the logistics of it, because the government are requiring us to work from home, then people are potentially still muddling through, even though we've been doing it for a long time. If you decide you want people to work from home either on a permanent basis or, you know, in a longer term arrangement, you know, we will come on to sort of health and safety. You will potentially, as Lucy said, you might have to kit them out at home and in the office, and that is something to, you know, put a little bit of thought into, because the idea is really that they can easily transition from the office to their home environment with minimal sort of, you know, disruption, and with all their IT, you know, working effectively. So it may prove a bit more challenging initially, and to sort of set this up for the longer term. So we suggest that you actually maybe have something in a trial period, or maybe a temporary period. So at the moment, obviously the government are still saying that we should work from home if we can. So if you're thinking, well, maybe September's a good time to start, moving things forward, it may be better to set something up and say, well, we'll do something, for the next sort of 3 months up until Christmas, and then we'll review it again and think about putting something more permanent in place. We're just conscious that if you actually go down something, permanent route, and then it's not working out for whatever reason, it's difficult to pull back from that if you've changed people's contracts. And I talk a little bit more about contracts on one of the later slides about making it happen. So hopefully that's giving you a bit of an overview there. And I'm going to hand back to Lucy to talk about training and performance management.
Thank you, Heather. So here we're going to look at how you actually manage people who are on hybrid working. So some days you may see all of your people in the office, and then you may not see them for days, or you may not have seen them for weeks or months. And once hybrid working perhaps gets a bit more settled, you may find that actually certain people gravitate more to the office and certain gravitate more to working from home. Younger people may find, especially graduates, may find that actually they want to be in the office more than 4 or 5 days a week, because actually they're living in a shared house and their social life is work. So they may be in the office, but you may find that the managers are working from home. So how's that going to work? How are the managers really going to know what's happening if everybody's actually working in the office and they're not seeing that on a daily basis? And it may be that they will be in a couple of days a week, so they could see it then. But how do you actually start managing performance? Because over the last year, it's just been about getting through, getting the job done, carrying on as best you possibly can. But that's going to have to change, and it's going to have to be a bit more measured and a bit more formulaic, because you are going to want to measure your employees' performance, making sure that they are doing what you ask them to do. Feedback and internally performance-related pay or bonuses. How can you actually judge that if you're not seeing someone or being able to really judge how they're working? So training, whereas it would have been in a room face-to-face, you would have had everyone there, is now probably over Zoom or some kind of virtual platform. So putting in training to help your managers manage their people on a virtual as well as a physical basis will be absolutely key. And how one-to-one's carried out. It can be fine that they're actually all on Zoom, but actually maybe a one-to-one, a face-to-face can actually tell you an awful lot more about how that person is actually doing. And one of the key things that we're seeing a rise of in terms of training and performance management is coaching for managers about giving them the tools to be able to manage a person, whether they're at home or in the office, and being able to assess how people are doing. Now, of course, it may be that everybody in your team is working fine, but it could be actually they're not. Although they're meant to be working 9 to 5 or whatever hours you've specified, they're actually only doing a couple of hours. And you know that because you're starting to see the productivity drop off. How do you manage that poor performance when actually they're not in the office? How do you check, if you like, what people are doing and how they're working? And how do you manage poor performance and productivity? That is very different. If someone's sitting in front of you and you can see that they're on their phone all day because you're in an office environment, then you can actually say something. If you haven't seen someone for weeks, how do you know what they're doing? And how do you manage all of that? So this managing from a distance needs slightly different skills, slightly different toolbox for people to work towards. And it's about giving the team the skills to be able to do that and the training. So this is a key part of it now because it's very different now. And I'm certainly within our training department, our training team have come up with totally new ways of training people and actually teaching people to sell on Zoom. It's all sort of old hat now because everybody learnt last year, but about learning to do different things online. Maybe also part of what you need to give to your employees, because they're doing something in a completely different way to they did it before. And some people like Zoom, some people don't, or maybe they've got Zoom fatigue. So thinking about the needs to be able to deliver on the bottom line is very key here. And the other thing you need to be able to assess is your employees' well-being. And that's a little more tricky, perhaps, when you don't see them actually physically face-to-face. And that's the final part of our model here. And Heather's going to talk us through that and health and safety.
Hi, yes, health and safety, everyone's favourite topic. But in terms of, yes, hybrid working or remote working, you know, there are quite a lot of health and safety considerations. And obviously with people working from home for quite a while now, you would think that actually a lot of people are sort of up to speed with everything. But I think because of the way the pandemic's happened and everyone thinking, well, actually, we might be back in the office, and then it just keeps getting delayed and delayed and delayed. There may not have been proper plans put in place, you know, for the length of time that we've actually been remote working. And therefore, you know, if you are considering it in the longer term, now we need to take a closer look at it and making sure that we've done sort of risk assessments for people who are working from home. Obviously, I should think most organisations have done all their COVID secure measures in the workplace, but it doesn't end there, because before people come back, you'll need to make sure that you're consulting with employees and making sure that they're comfortable with the arrangements that you put in place, so that they do feel comfortable, you know, coming back into the office. And actually, some organisations are even doing sort of planning sort of mini inductions to induct people back into you know, working in the office, which might be, you know, it might be, you know, feel quite different from how it was before. And just as an aside, I mean, I personally think that organisations, I think it's Nationwide, who they're putting in their offices more collaboration spaces, and they're putting in quiet zones. And I think that people with, you know, putting in more plants and things to actually make it feel a bit less austere, because actually if you walk into an office and you haven't been into one for a long time, it actually does feel quite sterile compared to actually your home environment. And so we need to encourage people to want to be back in that office environment, as well as, you know, meeting all the health and safety requirements that we're going to talk about. So what we need to also think about is, as well as all the physical things that we need to do from a health and safety perspective, which we'll come on to, is also people's mental well-being, and that there has been an increase in sort of isolation. So we need to continue to provide employees with ways to connect with colleagues whilst working from home, you know, promoting online communities, virtual social groups, or hangouts, or things that people can do so they are actually able to socialise with their colleagues, or have these sort of you know, coffee chats and things that people tend to do. We need to make sure that, you know, that they're being maintained. And also to encourage employees to create effective boundaries between work and home. So we've talked about people who aren't sort of, you know, switching off. So, you know, really just to try and make sure that people aren't working sort of, you know, really long hours, and just, you know, just checking in, you know, managers just checking in with their employees, seeing how they're doing. Obviously, they'll see from emails if people are working potentially outside of hours, but then some people could store up those emails, just write them all in the evening, and, you know, send them first, you know, in the next morning. But then it might become a bit evident from that potentially that's what they're doing. So we might need to offer people specific work-life balance support, such as one-to-one coaching. So if you've identified an issue that someone's having, then maybe that's a red flag, and that we can offer them a little bit more, you know, support. And that's where we need to coach managers into how to look for some, you know, mental health concerns. Things like people having a change in their weight and their appetite, people having sort of sleeplessness, absence and timekeeping and productivity issues. They're all things that potentially can come out of people having, you know, issues with their mental health. So it's things that managers need to be looking out for and having that conversation about. And as you know, Lucy said, it would be quite nice to be able to have some face-to-face meetings. And I would encourage businesses to not put those off, to try and start gradually introducing those, and so you haven't got sort of a massive backlog when you are actually just going back into the office. So we also need to consider additional support that can be provided to employees. So that might be people that are in BAME groups, or young workers, or those that have previously experienced mental health. So maybe that's something that we can think about as well. So one thing that you need to consider is reasonable adjustments for disabled employees. So when you're doing sort of risk assessments for people, just bear in mind that employees with disabilities have got that right to have some reasonable adjustments. So they need to be thought about and support provided. Also, if people are working from home, potentially they're a lone worker, and that also has some requirements under health and safety legislation. So you can find information. We can provide information on that, and the health and safety executive also is quite useful for lots of sort of documents on how to support people and what you need to do from a lone working perspective to support employees. Also, obviously, we talked about before, travel to work, so that's another consideration for people, particularly if people are used to getting public transport, probably people that are based in London, and obviously a lot of people have got cars, and so having to think about how you can support employees. So it might be, could they have a later start time, so not everyone, so you're not travelling at the normal regular commuter times, so to reduce, so they're not travelling at really busy times. So maybe just looking at maybe cycle to work schemes, things that previously you may not have considered, but now there's also a big increase in people cycling, and so things like this might come more to the fore than they might have done previously. And one other thing is accident reporting, actually. So if people are working from home, to make sure that if they do have any accidents, that they do report those. And the home environment is, we have to remember, is that it should be equivalent to the workplace in terms of health and safety. And so when you do your risk assessments, you need to be looking at trip wires, and if they've got the right seats, and everything that you would need to do if they were working in the office. And so again, it's a little bit like doubling up your efforts there, but you have a duty to keep people safe when they're working at home, just as much as you do when they're working in the office. And when I sort of see that, the agile hybrid working model, which is work anywhere, I think, well, actually, it's actually quite hard to achieve that work absolutely anywhere, because you've got these health and safety responsibilities and GDPR as well, so that people are working in environments that they, there's not going to be an issue with data security. It's going slightly off the point, but you sort of get the picture. So that's all I'm going to say. Health and safety, but obviously there's quite a lot to consider on that. And can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So now we've just got, we're just going to talk about sort of making it happen, where, obviously what you need for a business, what your employees' preferences are, and how you can sort of merge the two to come to a solution. So in terms of changing contract terms, the organisations need to be aware that when you're implementing this, you may need to look at your terms and conditions for staff. So if wherever your employee is working, if they're working the majority of the time in one location, that would normally be their primary place of work. And so if you agree on a permanent basis that someone's going to work from home 4 days a week, then that would be their primary place of work, as opposed to the office. But I don't see a problem with putting in contracts that yes, that's your primary place of work, but on a Friday, you obviously have to work from the office, and then that will be a requirement, and we wouldn't necessarily pay expenses for people to travel to the office on that day, because that's your designated place of work on that day. Because obviously, from an HMRC perspective, employees potentially, if their primary place of work is their home, when they're travelling to the office, that could be a business journey, and then they could potentially start charging you for just travelling into the office for a meeting. So these are things that you need to just sort of put a little bit of thought into if you're considering changing people's contracts to be sort of home based. So we need to obviously clearly outline the arrangements and how it's going to work. So if you decide that people are having set days from home, or it might be that they're moving to sort of a shift pattern, then this obviously needs to be documented to them. But as we said, it might you might need to think about can we do something on a trial basis rather than changing things permanently. We also have a lot of clients who use home worker agreements, and they're basically just setting some of those ground rules around how it's going to work with them working from home, and they're quite useful policies to have. And it basically just covers things like their setup at home, their IT, that they're working in a professional environment, and just a host of other things really to make sure that you've got the arrangement that works for both of you, and you agree to working from home on those terms. I think obviously a lot of organisations have probably put those in place already. So the other thing, if you want to look at doing something organisation wide, you need to proceed sort of carefully, because some people may not want that hybrid working option, which is obviously what Lucy sort of touched on. So, I would urge caution if an organisation said, yes, actually, we're going to close our office and everyone's just going to work from home. Because if you had a contract and it said your workplace is the office and you actually want to go into the office, that's a fundamental aspect of your contract. You could even be in breach of contract by actually saying to somebody, you've got to work from home now, because that wasn't what they signed up to when they came to work for you. So the hybrid, which is obviously more partly working from home and partly working in the office, is that still could potentially work. But if you wanted to go to a remote working environment, then I think that's something that would be something that all your employees would have to buy into, and you'd need to consult them on that. So you need a project plan, and I'm sure that you're all working towards that anyway. But it's important to obviously involve employees. You're going to have managers that need to input for what the requirements are for their departments, and really there's a lot of communication involved in giving people notice of any changes. You're also going to want to look at your flexible working arrangements. You're going to look at your other policies, such as maybe your GDPR and your data protection policies, things that potentially might need updating based on these changes that you're making. And if you operate in a unionised environment, obviously you're going to need to consult the union regarding changes for the workforce as well.